Good evening, everybody. We're so glad to have you join us. Once again, the title of the presentation tonight is Justice Indeed, Addressing the History of Racial Covenants and Segregation in Washtenaw County. And we have a panel that will be sharing this information. And so I'd like to now introduce our panel, and I'll share a little bit about each one of our panelists. Susan Fleurant is working with Justice Indeed as a student attorney in the Civil Rights Litigation Initiative at the University of Michigan Law School. After graduating law school, Susan intends to practice disability rights law. Over the past 3 years, she has worked for the Minnesota Disability Law Center, Legal Services of South Central Michigan's Medical Legal Partnership, AARP Foundation, and the Network for Public Health Law. So welcome, Susan. Justin Schell is the director of the Shapiro Design Lab, a peer and engaged learning community at the University of Michigan Library. His work in the lab revolves around facilitating learning and project development in areas of publicly engaged scholarship, community and citizen science, accessibility and disability justice, media productions, and more. So welcome to Justin. Michael J. Steinberg is a professor from practice at the University of Michigan Law School and the founding director of the Civil Rights Litigation Initiative at Michigan Law. Before becoming a law professor, Steinberg was a legal director of the ACLU of Michigan for 22 years, where he oversaw all ACLU litigation in the state. Professor Steinberg has litigated dozens of high-impact, high-profile cases on a wide variety of civil rights issues, including 6 cases that have reached the United States Supreme Court. Professor Steinberg and his students, working with many community and university leaders, recently founded Justice Indeed to not only raise awareness about racially restrictive covenants in Washtenaw County, but also to take action to repeal them. Welcome, Michael. Bailey Sullivan is a second-year PhD student in the history of art at the University of Michigan, Ann Arbor, specializing in late medieval Northern European art. Her research focuses on the visual culture of physical and imaginative travel, most notably cartography and cityscapes. To this end, she has been a collaborator on the Justice Indeed projects since April 2021 and serves as a member of the Black Washtenaw County Collaborative Group at the University of Michigan. So welcome, Bailey. Claire Zingerman is an associate professor of architecture and art history at the University of Michigan, where she teaches about the history of the built environment over the last 2 centuries, focusing on its buildings, spaces, materials, methods, and social effects. About 6 years ago, Claire, working on Detroit area industries and their social and environmental effects on the region and globally. She is part of a research collaborative entitled Black Washtenaw County at the University of Michigan, and will contribute to the larger BWC effort as a member of the Race and Arts and the Built Environment Working Group. So welcome to Claire. And I'm Joyce Hunter. As was mentioned, I'm serving as the moderator tonight. And also I am the president and CEO of the African American Culture and Historical Museum of Washtenaw County. I'm a founding member, and I'm happy to share that after being a museum without walls for many years, we opened to the public on October 24th. So I just want to share that. And now we're going to get into the panel discussion, and we're going to start with Michael.
Thank you, Joyce. I appreciate it. And thank you to the District Library for hosting this event. We're very excited to let you know what Justice Indeed is doing. For those of you joining late, I'm a law professor, and the director of the Civil Rights Litigation Initiative at the University of Michigan Law School, which litigates civil rights cases and works on civil rights projects such as this one. I'm also an Ann Arbor resident, a proud Ann Arbor resident. I have been since 1984. And, there's a tendency among Ann Arborites to think that we live in a town that cherishes racial harmony. And there's problems on the racial justice front in other parts of the country or the state, but not in Ann Arbor, that there's always been racial harmony and white supremacy exists other places, but not here. And I'm just going to share some photos from my neighborhood. They may look very familiar to you who live in Ann Arbor. These were all taken within 2 blocks from my house. Many of you probably have signs like these. This neighborhood stands united against hate. Hate has no home here. But actually, hate does have a home here. In fact, in Ann Arbor, like all parts of the country, there are these things called racially restrictive covenants. They were imposed in neighborhoods, mostly beginning in the 1920s. And what racially restrictive covenants do is they prohibit people of certain races, mostly all people of color, sometimes Jewish people and non-Christians as well, from occupying a home. And I'm going to show you the covenant on my house. Here you go. This is what it says. No part of said land shall be occupied by persons not of the Caucasian race, except as guests or servants. Now, I first learned about racially restrictive covenants when I bought my first house in Ann Arbor in '85. I was kind of a nerd, and I read the closing packet, and I saw this provision, something very similar to this. And I asked the real estate agent, what's going on here? I don't want to buy a house that has one of these. And she said, oh, don't worry about it. These exist on, thousands of homes in Ann Arbor. And I said, well, is there anything we can do about it? And she said, it would be very expensive and difficult, and they're not enforceable anyway. So just don't worry about it. And I bought the house. I later moved to another house on a little bit on the west side of town in the Merrifield Wildwood neighborhood. And it has a racially restrictive covenant too, the one that I just showed you. And I decided that I was going to do something about it one day. And after being at the ACLU for 22 years, I came to the University of Michigan Law School, and I work with lots of great students, including Susan Fleurant. And we do a lot of fair housing work. And we were looking to raise awareness in Ann Arbor and throughout Washtenaw County that there are race discrimination problems right here at home. And we had the idea of raising awareness about racially restrictive covenants. And we thought, some people were saying, why should we focus on this? The Supreme Court held in 1948 that they're not enforceable. They're currently illegal. Why don't we focus our work on some discrimination that's happening now? And we decided that we were going to do something about it for three major reasons. Number one, covenants cause harm right now. People reading through their closing packets see, especially people of color, that they're not welcome in the neighborhood that they're about to move into. Sure, it's not enforceable, but we saw it as being no different than there being a sign in the entrance to the subdivision that says whites only. It's not enforceable, but it causes psychic harm, stigmatic harm, and we wanted to do something about it. Also, we thought that education about racism starts at home, and racially restrictive covenants are not the only form of housing discrimination that existed and caused Ann Arbor to be so segregated. There are many other types of discrimination in mortgage lending, real estate steering, zoning practices, redlining. That we didn't have redlining in Ann Arbor, but it existed elsewhere. But we thought that by focusing on racially restrictive covenants, that it would be an entree into educating about the systemic racism that causes the segregation that exists now. Many people who move into Ann Arbor, it's a very transient town. They think, oh, well, these neighborhoods are largely white for reasons unrelated to history. Maybe preference of people buying homes, or it's just so expensive here. But they don't understand how racially restrictive covenants strip people of color of wealth and opportunity to attend schools in integrated areas. And we needed to not only educate the general public, but specifically policymakers who were taking action related to affordable housing and zoning and all kinds of issues. They need to know about what's happening. So you're going to hear more about Justice Indeed soon, but we didn't want this to be just a project of the law school or just a project of the university. So we developed a great advisory board of community civil rights leaders, and we have a wide array of expertise at the university about this. And so the advisory board, as Joyce will probably tell you in more detail, gives guidance to the project. We also have decided that racially restrictive covenants are not something we just want to educate people about, but we want to do something about it. And I think you'll be hearing later in the presentation about the plans that we have. So I think I'm going to stop there, Joyce. And I think I'm back on later, and then there'll be time for questions at the end as well.
Okay, thank you, Mike. So we're going to go to Justin now.
Okay, thanks, Joyce. I am going to share my screen, and we'll share some slides as well. Everyone can see that, correct? Cool.
Yes.
So as Joyce mentioned, I'm Justin Schell. I direct the Shapiro Design Lab at the University of Michigan Library. And I'm going to talk a little bit about what we know so far about racially restrictive covenants in Washtenaw County. So our colleague, Rob Goodspeed, who's in the Architecture and Urban Planning, Urban Design Department, and Grace Stephen, who is actually on this call, an undergraduate research assistant extraordinaire, have looked at where these covenants appeared on the subdivision level in Washtenaw County. And so what that means is the large sort of subdivided tracts of land that individual properties are on. And so they looked through a system that was developed with Liberty Title, as well as with the Washtenaw County Clerk's Office, to look at digitized deeds at the subdivision level, and then figure out which ones at that level had a racially restrictive covenant. And so the time frame for that investigation, which was over the last year or so, was from 1912 to 1952. And that was where generally where these covenants were utilized, the time frame these covenants were utilized. And through that research, they found 121 plats or subdivisions had racially restrictive covenants in Washtenaw County. You can see a map of this on the left. I will show this. This is a live map that is viewable on our website, and I will pull that up in a second. Breaking down these covenants by decades, we can see there was a large occurrence of these in the 1920s, which happened all around the country, actually, in different communities. This was after a couple different Supreme Court decisions around other methods that people were trying to use to either to enforce segregation or maintain segregation. And so we see that huge number relative to the other decades in Washtenaw County as well. 109 of these plats limit the sale or use of the property to Caucasian or white people only. And then 12 of these restrict the sale or use of property to colored or African people. There also are anti-Jewish clauses as well in some of these covenants. And so we see that throughout. And again, I will show this map a little bit more in a second, but this is just some of the language that we found in these covenants. So as I mentioned before, no persons or any race other than the Caucasian race shall use or occupy any building or any lot, except that this covenant shall not prevent occupancy, domestic servants of a different race domicile with an owner or tenant. So if you were a servant of something other than a Caucasian race, you were okay there, but you only could be servants. And then another one, said premises shall at no time be used or occupied for manufacturing purposes, nor by a colored person or persons for any purpose. And oftentimes you will see in these covenants this alignment of sort of nuisances, and that's how they were thinking of these. You will see often in these documents, these covenants are lists of things that they didn't want on the property. So billboards, manufacturing, liquor stores, things like that. And so that these were part and parcel of these kinds of restrictions, but that they could place that same sort of restriction and denial on human beings as they could on a billboard. And so looking specifically at the Ann Arbor and Scioto, city of Ann Arbor and Scioto, Ann Arbor and Pittsfield Township, we can see that 11% of the parcels, which means just the individual plots of land within subdivisions, are contained within subdivisions that have racially restrictive covenants. And so on this map, you can see that anything that is like an orange or a yellow, that has a restrictive covenant at the subdivision level. And so you see these throughout the city and throughout the area. I think we are still trying to understand the histories of these particular neighborhoods, these particular subdivisions, and what led them to be utilized in, this subdivision, but not this subdivision. What were the historical circumstances or the individuals who pushed forward or pushed against it? And that's something that we're going to be exploring over, in the coming months, along with our friends in the Black Washtenaw County Project, as well as within Justice InDeed and others as part of our community advisory board. And so I wanted to show you the map itself. And you can see this is the Washtenaw County as a whole. And anytime you see a blue or a green or a purple, you will be able to see some of the details on the covenant. And so this is one that we'll be talking about in a little bit, the Lakewood subdivision. So you can click on this map and find out some of the basic information about the document, but you can also find the exact language as well. And so you can look around and see what different subdivisions, maybe it's a subdivision that you are in, and see what kinds of, whether it has a history, has a racially restrictive covenant or not in there. And so this is really early. I mean, this was a lot of work, but it's also really early in the process. And I'll come back and talk in a little bit about, what we are trying to do when we talk about individual deeds that go beyond the subdivision level. Because when we talk about individual deeds, we're talking about an order of magnitude more in terms of number of documents. They're anywhere between 500 and 600,000 pages of text that would need to be searched through. And so I will talk about that in a little bit as part of the overall sort of multifaceted, multi-part projects of Justice Indeed. And again, we can talk about more of these specific locations as part of the Q&A. But for now, I'm going to hand it off to Susan, who will talk a little bit about the Lakewood subdivision and the efforts that Justice Indeed is trying to facilitate with them to have and repeal their racial covenant. So go ahead, Susan.
Thanks so much, Justin. Hi, everyone. I'm Susan Fleurant, and I am a student attorney with the Civil Rights Litigation Initiative at the University of Michigan Law School. And I'm going to speak a little bit about our work with the Lakewood subdivision, which Justin just showed on the map there. This is a community of roughly 250 homes, and they have a racially restrictive covenant in their communal documents, so governing the entire community. And this was recorded in 1925. You'll see the text here. It says, "No persons of any race other than the Caucasian race shall use or occupy any building or any lot, except that this covenant shall not prevent occupancy by domestic servants of a different race domiciled with an owner or tenant." And in this particular community, the communal restrictions note that this language applies to 119 lots in the neighborhood. So those are the ones we're focusing on in particular. And like Mike mentioned, these are no longer enforceable, but they do continue to exist in title documents and deeds. They continue to cause harm, foster exclusion, and signal animosity toward non-white residents and potential buyers in these communities. The Lakewood neighborhood came to us after seeing an article in the paper about a presentation that Professor Rob Goodspeed and Professor Mike Steinberg gave. And they reached out about wanting to take action to get rid of their racially restrictive covenant. So that brings us to our work today, where we are working on putting together an amendment, which we've drafted in partnership with the neighborhood and with other experts. We're working closely with the Homeowners Association board there. And the amendment contains provisions which serve to educate the community as a whole about racially restrictive covenants and their history, and also repudiate them. And so there are provisions indicating that the restriction does not reflect the values of the community, and the replacement language, which Justin will show here on the screen that we've put together. So the replacement language, it will say, "The Lakewood subdivision seeks to be an inclusive community that welcomes and celebrates diversity. The sale or occupancy of any lot or dwelling shall not be restricted based on religion, race, color, national origin, disability, age, sex, height, weight, familial status, marital status, sexual orientation, gender identity, gender expression, military status, or source of income." So a much more inclusive set of text there than, of course, what the racially restrictive covenant, which is currently in the documents, says. So Lakewood has a clear process to repeal the racially restrictive covenant based on their governing documents. In the community, the covenant can be repealed by a majority vote of the homeowners in the neighborhood. So we're working with them to organize the community, and they're doing a lot of groundwork to educate their neighbors and gain support for this work. And so soon we'll begin collecting signatures and working to get the amendment signed and filed with the Register of Deeds office to effectuate the repeal. Lakewood is the first neighborhood in Washtenaw County that we're working with. This is just our first step, but we hope to work with other communities and plan to do so in the coming months. And we're also hoping to develop a toolkit so other neighborhoods can mimic this work. And as Justin mentioned, there are some individual homes with racially restrictive covenants that are outside of the subdivision arrangement. And so we're also hoping to streamline the process for individual homeowners in the county as well. I also just wanted to mention how grateful we are to the board of the Lakewood Homeowners Association and the entire Lakewood community for their energy and partnership in this work. We're really grateful that they reached out and are so enthusiastic about diving in and being the first community to repeal their racially restrictive covenant and replace it with language that's much more accepting and inclusive. And so next I will pass it off to Mike, who is going to discuss, maybe not Mike. I'll pass it back to Joyce, I think.
No, why don't we go ahead and go to Mike and then come back to me? That's fine. Go ahead, Mike. You're muted, Mike.
Thank you, Susan. Great job. So community organizing is one way to get rid of the racially restrictive covenant. I just want to point out that we had some conversation among our group, and there's some similar conversation nationally about whether to white out the racially restrictive covenant or to repeal it through an additional document. We decided that we didn't want to just redact it or whitewash history, that it was important that there be a record that white supremacy existed here in Washtenaw County, similar to other places throughout the country. And instead, we've drafted this document that repeals it, repudiates it, rejects it, and replaces it. So that's one way to repeal racially restrictive covenants. There's at least two others that we've been able to figure out. One is through legislation, and there is currently pending legislation in the state of Michigan House. It's been introduced by Representative Sarah Anthony from Lansing, and we've been giving some technical assistance to her and to another group called Street Democracy in Detroit, who's been working on that. What this legislation would do is make it easier for individuals to get rid of the racially restrictive covenant. There's been states across the country, a handful of them, who have adopted similar legislation. And another way to get rid of these things is through litigation, which is what my clinic does. And we're looking to bring a case. It's still in the early stages, but in 1948, when the U.S. Supreme Court held that courts will no longer enforce racially restrictive covenants, the court did not hold that they were illegal. And in fact, in Ann Arbor and other places across the country, they continue to be added to the deeds in new subdivisions for some time. It wasn't actually until 1968, when Congress passed the Fair Housing Act, that they were made illegal. So right now, under the Fair Housing Act, it's illegal to express a preference based on race or religion or many other categories in any housing transaction. And so it's our position that it's pretty clear that racially restrictive covenants are illegal, and that it's illegal to record them. And whenever there is a transaction of property, a transfer of property, the deed is, the transaction is recorded by the Register of Deeds, and we believe that that's illegal. And so if we were to develop a case, it would be to prevent the Register of Deeds from recording properties with racially restrictive covenant unless and until the covenants were repealed. And we would make it easy for the seller to repeal it beforehand. And it's something that we're looking at very seriously. The Register of Deeds in in Washtenaw County, Larry Kestenbaum, is very supportive of this work, as is the whole office. And so, maybe next year, early, you'll see something along these lines. And it's very exciting. The organizing work that's being done, the legislation, the litigation, it's all very cutting edge. And we hope that what we do here in Ann Arbor and Washtenaw County will serve as a model for communities across the country. Well, I should say we weren't the first to develop a project like Justice Indeed. We love our name, Justice in the capital D, Indeed. But there's been some other groups that have done mapping, for example, Mapping Prejudice in Minneapolis, Segregated Seattle. There's a few other groups that are doing this work, but as far as I can tell, we're the group that's taking it one step further to actually repeal the covenants. And so I'm going to stop there and hand it to Joyce.
Okay, thanks, Mike. So what I want to mention is Mike mentioned earlier that we had an advisory board, Just Indeed advisory board. But in order to move forward with some of the work that's going on, we also have committees. So I have 3 committees, and I just want to share information with you about those committees and who chairs those committees. First of all, we have our policy committee, and it's chaired by Delphia Simpson and Jessica Lataw. The policy committee seeks to ensure that elected officials consider the legacy of racially restrictive covenants and other racist housing policies when adopting housing policies. The committee also explores possible ways to repeal racially restrictive covenants through community organizing, legislation, and litigation. You've heard a little bit about that. Another committee we have, excuse me, is the History Committee, and that's chaired by Matthew Countryman. And the History Committee documents the use of racially restrictive covenants, other racist housing policies in Washtenaw County, and the causes of residential segregation in the county. The third committee, which is the Education Committee, is a committee that actually organizes this event. And I chair this committee. And the Education Committee creates and shares content on racially restrictive covenants and the history of segregated housing in Washtenaw County through curriculum, museum exhibits, and online presentations. And we've had conversation, we've consulted with a teacher in the Ann Arbor District, Anthony Stewart, talked about development. We talked with him about developing curriculum, and he shared that this information could be incorporated into the art, into literature, history, or economics. So we've been looking and discussing how to develop curriculum packets to incorporate the information about racially restrictive covenants. So those are our 3 committees: policy, history, and education. So now I think I turn it back over to Justin.
Thanks, Joyce. I'm going to share my screen one more time. So as I mentioned before, if we look at this map, we see the subdivision level, and it's much more difficult to get a sense of where racially restrictive covenant deeds or where racially restrictive covenants live in individual housing deeds. That requires going through many individual deeds that are thankfully digitized and are in the Washtenaw County clerk system, document system, but it's still required. Many of these are very old. The photocopies, they're not great quality, but we're actually doing better than many other cities where they aren't even digitized. People are looking through bound paper books in city archives and things like that. But our friends at the Mapping Prejudice Project, which Mike mentioned in Minneapolis, have developed a workflow and a process whereby which they can take take these digitized deeds, do what's called optical character recognition on them, meaning the computer is going to read the documents and try to determine that, you know, this line of the image actually says, you know, what we might read as a racial covenant. And then using a platform called Zooniverse, we can send these pages that we suspect might have a racial covenant to volunteers in our communities, and who can help us not only confirm that a covenant is there, but also to get the specific language, and I think more importantly, figure out where exactly these are. And so we can get a really good sense of, and start to answer some of those questions of, why were these covenants in this neighborhood but not this neighborhood? But also to see how much of these were on the sort of individual level versus that higher level at the subdivision level. And so we're currently working through this process with people in Mapping Prejudice, as well as a larger group of researchers and community groups that are working to understand racial covenants in their own communities, as Mike said, in DC, Seattle, St. Louis, Chicago, and Minneapolis, St. Paul. And so this is something that we're hoping to launch within the next year, so that people who are attending this event tonight can take part and help us out. And we'll talk a little bit more later about how you could help us out now. But this is what's sort of coming down the line in terms of that individual deed level restrictions, as opposed to the subdivision level. And again, we can talk a little bit more about this in the Q&A and go into some more detail, but I want to make sure that we have enough time to get through and talk about all the different facets of this project. So I will hand it back over to Joyce for now.
Thanks, Justin. And now we're going to go to Claire Zingerman and Bailey to talk about the Black Washtenaw Collaborative.
Bailey's going to start us off, and I'll come in after her.
So thank you, Joyce, for helping us moderate, and Justin for going through these slides. I'm going to introduce us to the Black Washtenaw County Collaborative Project, which is a project that grew out of Justice InDeed in spring and summer 2021. As kind of this project group, we applied for and received a grant from the Michigan Humanities Collaboratory, which is through the University of Michigan this summer. And we ended up receiving the grant, which is exciting. The grant will fund a 2-year-long interdisciplinary project revolving around the intersecting histories of African-American community building and racial segregation in Washtenaw County, kind of broadly during the 20th and the early 21st centuries. Black Washtenaw County, which we also kind of call for shorthand BWC, you'll probably hear me say that a couple of times, builds upon 3 existing projects, one of which is the African American Cultural and Historical Museum of Washtenaw County with Joyce Hunter here. The Summer 2021 Michigan in the World Project, which is a public history project led by Dr. Jennifer Jones, Assistant Professor of History and Women's and Gender Studies at the University of Michigan, and Justice InDeed, which we're all here for. So there are several goals that the BWC has that, again, are kind of all intersecting and all interdisciplinary. And to give you a good idea of what we're doing, we have some bullet points here. One thing we seek to do is to foster greater understanding of Black experience in Washtenaw County over the 20th and 21st centuries, with a particular focus on post-1945 history. We want to understand how local histories may align with, maybe challenge, maybe complicate national histories about Black culture. We're centering community campus collaboration. The campus side of things involves myself, Professor Claire Zimmerman, who's here, among others, and community collaborators include, again, the African American Cultural Historical Museum of Washtenaw County, Justice InDeed, Jessica Lataw, Executive Director of Building Matters, in Ann Arbor, and Yodit Mesfin Johnson, CEO of Nonprofit Enterprise at Work, as well as some Ypsilanti folks like Ypsilanti-based historian Matthew Siegfried, designer Charlene Hobbs, among others. Kind of the last thing that we seek to do here is to conduct research, collect information of different kinds. The way we're doing this is by recording oral histories, researching primary archival materials housed locally at the AADL, for example, and the African American Cultural Historical Museum, AACHM, as we like to call it. We are locating secondary resources pertaining to racial inclusion and exclusion in Ann Arbor and Ypsilanti, and we hope to expand this to Washtenaw County in general. Ultimately, what we seek to do is to make these collected resources available to the public, hopefully electronically, maybe through exhibitions, and maybe even through a public art project. These are all things that are in the works with the BWC. Our job is to kind of be connecting and building on a host of efforts that are already underway, make them more accessible in the communities of the county and hopefully broadly. So I'm going to hand it over to Claire now.
Bailey, thanks so much. Thank you everyone for coming, and thank you, Joyce, for moderating. Justin, could you advance the slide? I just wanted to give a couple of examples of the kinds of things that we're interested in researching and pursuing. We have a working group called Race and Arts in the Built Environment that Joyce mentioned. This is one of several working groups in the BWC. And so in addition to the general goals that Bailey listed above, we are more specifically focusing on at least 4 initiatives. One, researching the creative activities of Black artists in Washtenaw County after 1945 and up to the present, which you see, what you see in the slide is a recent exhibition at EMU of Detroit Black artists in the same time period, a really impressive, moving show. And we'd like to know more about these artists and about artists who lived in, who lived in Washtenaw County more centrally. Justin, could you advance it one more time? A second initiative that we're pursuing in our subgroup is researching racial segregation through the built environment in the county, with a special focus on Black building and community building. You see a housing protest against segregated housing in Ann Arbor in the 60s, and that housing in the right, Pittsfield Village, which then was desegregated in response to public protest. You could go to the next one, Justin. Learning about the relationship between expanding Detroit metro industries and worker housing in Ypsilanti. So here is Amos Washington housing in Ypsilanti when it was first built. And then last slide is to explore the possibilities of community-based public art around the themes of the BWC going forward. And I just am showing two images from the recent opening of the Ann Arbor Cultural and Historical Museum. Wasanta Young's Nia, a mosaic mask on the left, and Gregory Sipp talking about his mosaics, Aretha and Astro Blue on the right. And in the middle, the African American Heritage mural We're just hoping that if there's enough interest in our project, we'll be able to sponsor some local artists in a community arts project. And that about concludes what we had to say. I'll hand it back to Justin, or to Joyce, but I did want to give a bit of a shout out to Mike Steinberg and to say how much we owe to him for this project, that this project really grew directly out of Justice Indeed. And it's really Mike was a really inspiring force in the development of this project. And I just want to thank him publicly for that.
Thank you, Claire, and thank you for acknowledging Mike. He recruited me and to join the advisory board, and I really have enjoyed meeting and working on this. So thank you, Mike. At this point, we're going to go to how you can get involved, and that will be Claire and Mike.
Well, I guess I'll go first. Thank you, Claire. That was very kind of you. But this has really been a team effort, and it's been incredibly exciting to see the organizing that's going on, and I think hopefully it'll yield some dividends. In any event, if you want to get involved, I am putting in the chat a link that you can go to. It's actually a link to our webpage. It has the maps that Justin showed you. It talks a little, there's an FAQ, and there's also a place for you to sign up if you're interested in getting involved. If I see in the chat that there's some people here that have racially restrictive covenants on their homes and want to do something about it, we'd love to hear from you. If you have an example of your racially restrictive covenant and want to take a photo of it and send it to us, we'd love to see that. There's some really interesting ones across the county. Some of the out county areas, especially on the lakes, they have one that says no persons of African or Jewish descent may occupy this property, nor aliens, except aliens that speak English. So we'd love to see your racially restrictive covenant. You know, I laugh. It's not really a laughing matter. It's a very serious matter, and one that we think will raise some consciousness in our county. But yeah, please get in touch with us. And Claire, would you like to also give ideas?
The BWC doesn't have a website yet. But I suspect that if you were to register interest in our projects on the Justice Indeed website, you would find your way to us. You could also write to me directly at that email address that's in the chat. We're looking for people who would be interested in participating, and we're just open to dialogue with anyone who wants to get in touch.
Okay, so thank you, Clara and Mike. I'm going to ask you if the panel has any final remarks or something they want to share before we go into Q&A.
I think there's one more point that I'd like to make. Lots of people are going to be looking at our map, and they may feel a sense of relief when they see that their house does not have a racially restrictive covenant, and think that, oh, I'm off the hook. I don't have to worry about this. But this is really, whether your house has a covenant or not, it's something that we all need to be concerned about and be aware of as we move forward, that white supremacy and systemic racism is something that exists here. And if you're white, we all have a sense of white privilege that we may not even recognize, but the damage that these covenants did to Black wealth and Black opportunity, it's hard to describe, especially when combined with the various other housing and employment and police practices. So, please go to our map, but keep that in mind as you look at it.
So I'd like to also thank everybody for coming out. I want to say again that this was a collaboration between Justice Indeed and Ann Arbor District Library. And so thank you to the Ann Arbor District Library. I want to thank the panelists. And once again, thank all of you for coming out. And so if nobody has anything else to add from the panel, then that concludes our program.
Thank you, Joyce, for moderating.
Okay. Thanks, everybody. Have a good evening.